Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piers, Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 6th of December 2024. We're going to start with Jake Sullivan and the US and some fairly big news that seems to have come out. There's an interesting Guardian piece we're going to go through. Jake Sullivan met with Andrew Yermak, so from the President's office, for more than an hour on Thursday, committing to provide Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of additional artillery rounds, thousands of rockets and hundreds of armoured vehicles by mid-January. And that's the Guardian. The US is also pledging to support Ukraine's manpower challenge, offering to train new troops at sites outside Ukrainian territory. This comes alongside a nearly finalised $20 billion loan settlement, which will be backed by profits from the immobilised Russian sovereign assets. White House planning new weapons and sanctions package in last-minute effort to aid Ukraine, says Sullivan. So let's go and look at this. The Guardian said senior Biden aide commits to giving Ukraine an avalanche of military assistance. This is exactly what we want to hear, but of course, then that's going to be it. We must remember that. Yeah, brilliant, loads of stuff. But then, from what we can understand, the US has said no to anything else. Whether that will change, I don't know. I'm so up and down with regard to what the Trump administration is going to do. All the people adjacent to the administration are just very negative about Ukraine. A couple of people in key positions, like Kellogg and Waltz, are much more knowledgeable and maybe in a better position to be able to influence Trump in the right direction, though. The White House has gained out a last-minute strategy to bolster Ukraine's war position that involves an avalanche of military assistance and sweeping new sanctions against Russia. Those sanctions are going to be important. According to a background briefing from a National Security Council spokesperson, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with the head of the Office of the Ukrainian President, Andriy Yermak, for more than an hour on Thursday, committing to provide Ukraine with hundreds of thousands of additional artillery rounds, thousands of rockets, hundreds of armoured vehicles by mid-January, according to the briefing shared with The Guardian. The US is also pledging to support Ukraine's manpower challenge, offering to train new troops at sites outside Ukrainian territory. This comes alongside a nearly finalised $20 billion in loans, which would be backed by frozen Russian assets. The United States is trying to is tying that to a number of new sanctions to come in the coming weeks, all with the intent of complicating Russia's ability to sustain its war effort and boosting Ukraine's bargaining power at the negotiation table. That could lay the groundwork for a future settlement. I wonder whether it's a bit like we're seeing at the moment, all the economic indicators for the US are looking really good. Manufacturing boom is just about to explode even more. And you might get Trump coming in and saying, look, I did all this, even though that was like 4 years of Biden economic policy coming to fruition. I wonder whether we are seeing Russia economically collapse or in the throes of economic despair right at the key moment that Trump then takes over and then doesn't do anything immediately, a bit like what Jack Keane said yesterday, doesn't do anything immediately, lets it all play out a bit, Russia properly collapses, and then the US kind of finish Russia off in some way, and then Trump goes, I did this, it was all me. That could well be what's going to happen. Where actually the Biden administration, for all its... I'm so split about the Biden administration. I think their intents have been positive, but they've been scared of escalation. And as a result of prolonged and drip-fed, whilst also being hamstrung by a 7-month Congress hiatus, impasse, which that would have really helped matters if that had got to Ukraine sooner. But by prolonging this, the unintended consequences, the law of unintended consequences here, and I said this the other night, I think in the live, I think that the suboptimal support of the US for Ukraine might end up being something that properly kills off Russia. So I'm not trying to give Biden kudos because I think this was unintended, but the protracted drip feed of military aid to Ukraine, and that has allowed the war to be much longer than it needed to be, then allowed sanctions to be piled on by the EU, by the UK, by the US, all these entities gradually ramping up sanctions. So you've got to an almost 3-year state where Russia has been absolutely rinsed by this war in a way that it wouldn't have been had the US given the right amount, the scare quotes, right amount of aid at the right time, to a much bigger degree without restrictions, that could have led to a quicker Ukrainian win, but Russia would have been able to fight another day. Russia are losing in Syria, I think, precisely because this war has gone on for 3 years in Ukraine and it has rinsed Russia. So I think we can be totally critical for lots of justifiable reasons of the Biden regime. But I think the unintended consequences might have been even better for the destruction of Russia on a more long-term basis. I really do think this. I think that this will require Russia to spend a generation getting back to where they previously were, particularly if sanctions maintain until reparations come in. I think, Russia are in a really difficult position, and it's not what was intended, but is what has happened. I mean, yes, it was, in general, you'd say that the Americans would like that to have happened, but this protracted war has led that to happen. Now, the White House's latest move comes a little more than a month in advance of Donald Trump's inauguration, when the US may unload an all-new strategy for a ceasefire altogether. According to a Reuters report, the president-elect's team is quietly developing a peace proposal for Ukraine that would effectively sideline NATO membership. Bad. And potentially cede significant territory to Russia. Bad. Signalling a dramatic shift from current US policy. Trump, for his part, has often stated that he would end the Ukraine and Russia war within 24 hours. Still, Ukrainian officials, including Yermak and Ambassador Oksana Markarova, have been meeting with key figures in Trump's transition team this week, including J.D. Vance, Florida representative and potential national security advisor Mike Waltz, and Trump's pick for Russia and Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, in a bid to secure continued support. These meetings carry heightened urgency, particularly after House Speaker Mike Johnson blocked a vote on $24 billion in additional aid to Ukraine. The Pentagon has nonetheless committed to sending $725 million in military assistance this week, the largest shipment since April. But I think, Mike Johnson's position tells you an awful lot, and that's not good news for Ukraine. I'm going to do a reaction video to this because it's such a fascinating Piers Morgan panel. I despise Piers Morgan these days. This conversation with Anastasia Paraskevova, who I've interviewed a number of times, she's on there. It's this chap here who is absolutely on point. Really, really brilliant. So he is General Wesley Clark, right? You got Cenk Uygur and you got this guy who's a Russian appeaser there. I'm going to do a reaction video to some of the comments from particularly Wesley Clark and this chap, because it was fascinating. This guy said everything. Wesley Clark is inside my brain, because I think his outlook for what should be done and what the situation is, and putting paid to these claims about NATO enlargement, as being one of the people working in NATO when that was happening, when Eastern Europe was going to NATO to say, can we join? Like, he's a guy with the knowledge. Anywho, Financial Times reports that the EU countries are discussing a €500 billion joint fund for common defence projects and arms procurement, which would tap bond markets and would be open to non-EU countries, notably the UK and Norway, so Europe as a whole rather than the EU. Very good. Europe could always do scale. It was a matter just of will and a matter of when. Fascinating. So $500 billion could be raised in bonds for Ukraine through Europe. That would be fantastic. So the EU ambassador to Ukraine, Katerina Mataronova, has announced 25 million euros, $26.5 million of funding on, that's yesterday, for Ukrainian non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and civil society organizations that will advance work related to Ukraine's eventual EU integration. So that's looking good. But although it must be noted that France is looking particularly vulnerable at the moment, right at the centre of the EU. Quote, this is speaking to Agence France Presse. Senior Ukrainian official said, our position is as transparent as possible. We will not lower the mobilization age from 25, despite calls from the United States. So the US is calling for, and indeed Ben Hodges, I think, said yesterday that this should happen, calling for a lowering of the mobilization age, but the Ukrainians resisting that for a number of different reasons, like I've spoken about previously. Finland is one of Ukraine's strongest supporters, said Defence Minister Antti Hakkinen, and we have no plans to change that. And they've put in, the president has announced the 26th round of aid to Ukraine, and now totals over $2 billion in as a sum. The latest is a 25 million euro package that will be used to supply winter equipment. The Finns provide stuff to Ukraine fairly regularly, as you can see, 26 rounds so far, and they don't tell you what's in those packages. They keep it quiet. Now, this is fascinating. Sikorski, this is the Radoslav Sikorski, the foreign minister of Poland, saying, quote, "We are currently conducting intensive talks with NATO on the transfer of the remaining MiG-29 fighter jets." So Poland have got a bunch of MiG-29s that they haven't given to Ukraine because they're waiting for some kind of backfilling into Poland. And the idea is they're going to get it in exchange for new F-16 modifications. So it might not be that they're getting planes to replace them, but actually their F-16 fleet gets modified as a kind of payment for the MiG-29s going to Ukraine. That would be really useful for Ukraine. Estonia to test its new Mark 1 air defense missiles. I don't really know what these are, on the battlefield in Ukraine in 2025. The Mark 1 by Frankenberg Technologies is a highly effective against munition against Shahed kamikaze drones. Production starts with dozens per week, and that will be ramped up by hundreds by Q3. So it's a long time in the future, though. But yeah, it'd be great to get their hands on these. So look at the size of the missile; it's very small, but that's to take out, of course, the Shahed drone. So it doesn't need to be, huge. Estonian military company starts testing anti-aircraft missiles in Ukraine. The technology is promising, and in the new year we will start testing it in Ukraine, Kusti Salm, CEO of Frankenberg Technologies, told ERR on Thursday. According to him, there is an agreement for experiments, and the company's technology has received wide attention. It's also evidenced by recent coverage by Bloomberg, the world's leading economic publication, where Frankenberg was singled out among Europe's 4 leading high-tech defense startups. An Estonian company with the simple motto, war-winning technology, manufactures low-cost missiles to shoot down drones that use artificial intelligence to hit a target, Bloomberg noted. Frankenberg's own website states that the company's goal is to bring the revolution to missile targeting systems using an AI-powered situational awareness program. Bloomberg points out that Sam, who recently served in the permanent secretary to the Estonian Ministry of Defense, has brought 4 retired generals to the company from Estonia, former chief of defense forces, etc., etc., etc. Less than a year ago, Frankenberg had not yet raised venture capital, but Sam said the company has secured funding, Bloomberg noted. According to Sam, the need for new weapons will not disappear, even if a ceasefire were to be concluded in Ukraine. So that's an important point. A new and much bigger war is expected in Europe, Sam told Bloomberg. Whether that's true, if there's a ceasefire, are we going to expect Russia to rumble on in the future? Probably not. I think Russia would be done for, militarily speaking, for some time. But those drones are now part of the battlefield, the modern battlefield, and so there will be a place for munitions like these going forward. Other prominent arms industry startups highlighted by Bloomberg are Helsing, which has already received 5 billion euros in funding, Stark Defence, and Volya Robotics, so on and so forth. Frankenberg's Mark 1 anti-aircraft missile is expected to deal more effectively with Shahed kamikaze drones of Iranian origin than before. Good news. Anyway, I thought that would be of interest. Now, in 2025, again, over 30,000 deep strike combat drones will be delivered to Ukrainian units, partially funded by international partners investing in Ukraine's defense industry, Denmark's, etc., etc. These next-gen drones can operate autonomously at long range and strike enemy targets with precision. Wow. 2025 could be interesting. And this is why people like Jack Keane, we were talking about yesterday, saying on Fox News Audio to Brian Kilmeade, he was saying we need to give the Ukrainians a bit of breathing space before we start demanding X, Y, and Z. We being the US Trump administration, when it comes in, it's like, hang on, 2025 could be interesting. There could be an awful lot of stuff coming online, and the Ukrainians might be a little bit frustrated that they're going to be forced to the negotiating table while they'll have lots of new toys to play with in the battle spaces in Ukraine. Now, Western weapons used in Ukraine, Panzerhaubitze 2000, Leopard tanks, etc., etc., are facing repair delays of months due to complex logistics and bureaucracy. Quote, it's absurd, but more systems are out of service due to lack of spare parts than from enemy fire, said the Bundestag Defense Committee head Faber. Doesn't surprise me at all. There are claims that, HIMARS being out of use for some time. There are claims of certain pieces going out for months as they have to go and get fixed up because they get used a lot. But spare parts and the logistics trail is difficult. And that's why the UK MOD has offered, I think, I don't know what the situation is, I haven't heard much about it, but a metal 3D printer unit that can print spare parts to obsolete spare parts to equipment that you can't get those spare parts for anymore in Ukraine. So you can put that 3D printing unit in there, start making parts, and as a result, you don't have to have a vehicle out for months being sent back to the UK or Poland or Germany or whatever. In the Czech Republic, over 8 million euros worth of funding were raised in a year for drones for Ukraine through the Drony Nemesis initiative. More than 12,000 FPV drones have been delivered and another 3,000 awaiting shipment. Nemesis, I talked this morning, the hits and losses video. There was a Nemesis drone. That's the first time I've seen that from Ukrainians, taking out some Russian piece of kit. I wonder if that's part of the Drony Nemesis initiative. Right, Ukraine bans transferring medics to infantry without consent. Zelensky issues a decree. Exceptions are allowed only if a person volunteers for infantry service. In other words, you're a medic. We need you. We need a meat assault. So you're drafted in. Here's a gun. But I'm a medic. No, so they make that illegal. A new legal framework will be created during martial law to enforce this. And then we hear from German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius yesterday warning of Russia's growing military threat. Quote, Russia has fully shifted to a war economy. Yeah, okay, agree, we know that. Producing 1,000 to 1,500 tanks annually. We're going to challenge that in a second, or at least the translation of that. Twice the combined stock of Europe's top 5 nations. Russia remains our greatest security threat. No doubt about that. The number 1,000 to 1,500 tanks produced annually is possibly a little problematic. As someone says in the comments below, note, Panzer, the German word, isn't tanks, but all kinds of armoured fighting vehicles. So instead of 1,000 to 1,500 tanks, that is 1,000 to 1,500 combat assets, you could argue. I.e. main battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, APCs, armoured personnel carriers, and self-propelled anti-aircraft guns combined. Also produced here includes refurbished and repaired. And this has long been the understanding, is that the Russians claim that they're making X number of bits of kit, but actually they're largely refurbishing ones out of deep stocks or repairing ones from the front line. And they throw those into the stats as well. So we need to be careful there. But Boris Pistorius is correct in saying, in alerting us to the fact that Russia is on a war economy and they are, pumping out everything they can. And what are we doing in return? Now, final thing to say is we're going to go to Syria, where Russia are now presently removing helicopters from their airbase in Homs back to Damascus. And we've seen, I think I saw at the beginning of this, was there not a Ka-52 attack helicopter? We'll see. Yes, that is. So that's a Ka-52 attack helicopter, and then looks like a Hind or something, a Me helicopter. That is interesting because it appears that the writing is on the wall, as I said in my last video. Now, what could happen here? We saw Fighter Bomber talk about how they're going to struggle to get all of their equipment out of Syria. On the one hand, the Russians are probably going to lose a lot of equipment if Syria falls, if the Assad regime collapses. Russia will lose a lot of equipment. On the other hand, they will also extract some equipment, quite a bit of equipment. And if Syria is now no longer part of their international agenda, then whatever equipment they do have left over can be brought to play in Ukraine. So on the one hand, it's great to see Russia get a bloody nose in Syria. On the other hand, that will allow equipment to, because that equipment is effectively being tied up in Syria. If it's no longer tied up in Syria, whatever they extract from Syria will almost certainly be able to go to Ukraine. And speaking of which, as of today, says H.O. Sutton, an update: Russian naval ships they appear to still be largely absent from Tartus. So they removed them the other day. A couple of frigates, I think it was, some auxiliary ships, and a submarine. Low-res satellite SAR radar satellite imagery, but sufficient to count ships in a Russian Navy pier. Awaiting high-res and watching other ports in the Mediterranean and transit routes. I'd be interested to know what ports the Russian Navy can access around the Mediterranean, around the world actually. Where are they welcome? Because in losing Sevastopol, losing Tartus, okay, they got Novorossiysk and the Black Sea coast, Russian coast there, but where else can they dock in the same sort of way they use Tartus? Be interested to know. If you guys know, let me know. I'm going to go and do a reaction video, I think, to this fascinating stuff. Anyway, take care, y'all, and I will speak to you soon. Please subscribe and share and like and all that kind of stuff. Speak to you soon.